after the court ruling. You could almost feel the air change in the neighborhood. It was like a heavy storm had finally passed, and the sun broke through the clouds. People who once avoided each other out of fear of Karen's spying eyes now stopped to talk, smile, and share stories. The grip that the HOA had over everyone loosened, and you could see it in the way neighbors walked a little lighter, laughed a little louder, and finally felt at home in their own community again. Karen, on the other hand, disappeared from the spotlight. The same woman who once strutted down the sidewalks with her clipboard and sharp tongue was nowhere to be seen. Her house looked quiet. The blinds stayed shut. The smugness that once filled her face was gone, replaced by silence. People whispered about her. Some said she was embarrassed. Others said she was furious. But no one really cared anymore. For the first time, Karen didn't matter. But what made the story even more powerful was how my neighbor, the federal judge, handled everything after his victory. He could have taken the spotlight. He could have demanded control of the HOA. He could have used his position to punish Karen and anyone who supported her. But he didn't. He chose humility. He chose peace. That decision made people respect him even more. Instead of bragging, he encouraged the community to come together. He suggested new elections for the HOA board, giving regular homeowners a chance to lead. He helped write fairer rules that treated everyone equally. He made sure fines were clear, reasonable, and never abusive. He even pushed for more community events, barbecues, holiday gatherings, and neighborhood cleanups, so that people actually enjoyed living there again. Slowly, trust began to rebuild. The same neighbors who used to hide indoors now sat on their porches. Kids rode their bikes freely without fear being yelled at for noise violations. Families decorated their yards without wondering if a violation notice would show up in the mail. The neighborhood started to look less like a prison and more like a place where people wanted to belong. But even with the positive changes, the memory of Karen lingered. People couldn't forget how much fear one person had caused. They couldn't forget how quickly the HOA had turned from a helpful association into a power-hungry machine. And deep down, there was always a question. Could another Karen rise again? My neighbor addressed that fear directly. At one of the first community meetings after the ruling, he stood up and spoke. His words were simple, but they carried weight. He reminded everyone that power only works if people stay silent. He told them that the reason Karen thrived for so long was because no one spoke up, no one questioned her, and no one fought back. He told them that it wasn't enough to just replace leaders. They had to stay engaged, stay aware, and stay united. That message hit home. People realized that the real victory wasn't just in beating Karen. The real victory was in learning to stand up for themselves. It was about refusing to let fear control their lives. And it was about remembering that communities should be built on trust, not on punishment. From then on, everything felt different. The HOA meetings were no longer tense battles. They became discussions where people actually listened. Homeowners who had been fined unfairly in the past were refunded, and the new leadership apologized for the pain caused. For the first time in years, people felt like their voices mattered. Karen, meanwhile, became a cautionary tale. Her name turned into a warning. Whenever someone started to act bossy or unfair, people would jokingly say, "Don't go full Karen." It was a way of remembering the past without letting it haunt the future. The most touching part came a few months later. On the 4th of July, the neighborhood held a big celebration. Families decorated their homes with flags. Children played games in the street, and the smell of barbecue filled the air. My neighbor, the quiet federal judge, was asked to say a few words. He stood there, looking around at the happy faces, and simply said, "This is what freedom looks like, not because of me, but because of all of you who decided you deserve better." The crowd erupted in cheers. Some people even had tears in their eyes. It was more than a holiday celebration. It was a moment of healing, a moment of pride, and a moment that reminded everyone of what they had overcome together. But here's the thing. This story isn't just about one neighborhood. It's about all of us. Because the truth is, Karens exist everywhere. They can show up in HOAs, in workplaces, in schools, even in families. They thrive on control, fear, and silence. And just like in our neighborhood, they can seem unstoppable until someone brave enough stands up and says, "Enough." My neighbor's story proves that you don't have to shout the loudest to win. You don't have to fight with anger or revenge. Sometimes, the strongest power is calm, steady, and backed by truth. Sometimes, the best weapon is simply knowing your rights and refusing to back down. And maybe that's the lesson we all need right now. Too many people let unfairness slide because they're afraid to fight. But unfairness doesn't go away on its own. It grows. It spreads. It becomes normal. Until one day it consumes everything, unless someone chooses to stop it. So let this story be more than entertainment. Let it be a reminder that no matter how small you feel, no matter how strong the bully seems, you have more power than you realize. And when you stand up not just for yourself, but for your community, you can change everything. Think about your own life. Is there a Karen controlling your peace? Is there an unfair system pushing you down? Are you staying silent because it feels easier than fighting back? Maybe this is your sign. Maybe it's time to take a stand. And if you do, remember my neighbor's example. Stay calm. Stay prepared. Know your rights. And don't let fear win. Because in the end, bullies always collapse under the weight of their own arrogance. But the brave inspire others for years to come. So here's my challenge to you. Don't just listen to this story. Share your own. Tell others about the battles you faced. Inspire someone who might be too scared to speak up. Because your story could be the spark that changes everything for someone else. And if you've ever dealt with an HOA nightmare, a controlling neighbor, or a real-life Karen, drop your experience below. Let's build a place where we learn from each other, support each other, and remind each other that no one deserves to live in fear of a clipboard, a rule book, or a power-hungry bully. Because in the end, this isn't just a story about one judge and one Karen. It's a story about all of us and the choice we have to make every single day, to stay silent or to stand strong. So tell me, what choice will you make? My neighbor is a federal judge, and most people in our neighborhood don't even realize it. He's quiet, keeps to himself, and you would never know who he is unless you talk to him. To the HOA, he's just another homeowner. But they had no idea who they were messing with when Karen decided to start her nonsense. The story begins in a quiet neighborhood where everything looked perfect on the outside, but inside the community, the HOA was a ticking time bomb. People were already tired of unfair rules, random fines, and constant power trips, but most stayed silent because they didn't want trouble. That's how HOAs survive, by making homeowners afraid to fight back. But this time, Karen picked the wrong person, and the way it all unfolded was nothing short of shocking. Karen was one of those people who believed rules didn't just exist. They existed for her to enforce them. She walked around with clipboard, snapping photos of people's lawns, mailboxes, and even garbage bins. If your grass was half an inch too tall, she'd send a violation letter. If you left your trash can out for an extra hour, she'd write you up. She fed off the power, and everyone hated it, but no one dared to challenge her. That changed when she noticed my neighbor's property. His house was beautiful, with a tidy yard and a small American flag proudly waving on the porch. To everyone else, it was perfect, but to Karen, it was a crime scene. She claimed the flag wasn't allowed because it wasn't on an approved flagpole. She also said his driveway had a tiny crack, and she demanded he fix it within 14 days or face fines. Now, here's the thing. Most people would have just rolled their eyes, maybe paid the fine, maybe fixed the crack. That's what Karen counted on. But my neighbor didn't. He stayed calm, quiet, and didn't give her the reaction she wanted. That's when Karen decided to push harder. She filed a lawsuit on behalf of the HOA, demanding he comply or face legal action. And this is where the story takes a turn that Karen never saw coming. Because the man she sued wasn't just another homeowner. He was a federal judge with decades of experience handling cases far more complicated than a petty HOA complaint. When he got served, he didn't panic. He didn't yell. He didn't even raise his voice. He simply smiled, thanked the server, and walked back into his house. It was like he knew something no one else did. And honestly, he did. He knew the law better than anyone in that neighborhood. And Karen had just walked straight into a battle she could never win. The whispers started spreading fast. People heard that Karen had actually sued the quiet man at the corner, the one who never bothered anyone. Some thought he'd be crushed under the HOA's pressure. Others thought maybe he'd cave in like the rest of them. But then word started spreading. He was a federal judge. Suddenly, the entire neighborhood was buzzing with curiosity, fear, and hope. Karen, of course, didn't back down. She doubled down. She strutted around, telling everyone the HOA was going to set an example and prove that no one is above the rules. She had no idea she was digging her own grave, because my neighbor wasn't just preparing to fight. He was preparing to expose every dirty trick the HOA had been pulling for years. You see, while Karen was busy harassing him, he was quietly gathering evidence. He looked into how fines were being issued, how money was being spent, and whether the HOA was following its own bylaws. What he found was shocking. Funds were being misused, rules were being enforced unfairly, and Karen herself had been breaking multiple HOA regulations without consequences. One of the biggest discoveries was that Karen's own property had violations she never addressed. Her fence was too tall. Her mailbox wasn't approved. Even her yard decorations were against the rules. But no one ever dared to fine her because she was the one writing the violations. That hypocrisy was about to be laid bare. When the court date arrived, the entire neighborhood was watching. People whispered about it at the mailbox. They peeked out their windows. Everyone wanted to know how this showdown would go. And let me tell you, the moment was legendary. Karen walked in confident, dressed like she was about to conquer the world. She had her stack of papers, her smug smile, and her arrogance shining through every step. She thought this was going to be an easy win. But then my neighbor walked in, calm, collected, professional. And the moment the judge presiding over the case realized who was standing before him, the energy in the courtroom shifted completely. My neighbor didn't need theatrics. He didn't need anger. He simply laid out the facts, point by point, law by law. He exposed how Karen and the HOA had been abusing their power, how fines were being selectively enforced, and how money wasn't being accounted for properly. He brought receipts, literal evidence that painted the HOA as corrupt and unfair. Karen tried to argue back, but every word out of her mouth dug her deeper. She contradicted herself. She made claims that had no proof. She stumbled over her own lies. And when my neighbor calmly pointed out her own violations, the entire courtroom gasped. It was like watching a balloon deflate in slow motion. The presiding judge looked unimpressed with Karen's antics. It was clear she had no case, no evidence, and no credibility left. By the end of the hearing, the ruling was obvious. Not only did my neighbor win, but the HOA was ordered to stop their unfair practices, review their bylaws, and refund several homeowners for unjust fines. Karen herself was removed from her position of authority. The neighborhood erupted in relief. People who had lived in fear of Karen's clipboard finally felt free. My neighbor, the quiet federal judge, had done what no one else dared to do. He stood up, fought back, and won. But here's the most powerful part. After all that, he didn't gloat. He didn't rub it in Karen's face. He simply went back to his quiet life, trimming his yard, waving his flag, and greeting neighbors with a smile. He wasn't looking for revenge. He just wanted fairness. And he made sure everyone in the community could finally have it. The story spread like wildfire. People in nearby neighborhoods heard about the HOA showdown and couldn't believe it. It became almost legendary. A reminder that sometimes the quietest people hold the most power, and bullies like Karen can only push so far before they meet their match. And to this day, whenever I walk by his house, I feel a deep respect, not just because he's a federal judge, but because he showed us all that standing up for what's right is possible. He didn't just win a case. He gave the entire neighborhood its peace back. If you ever dealt with an HOA nightmare or had a Karen in your life try to control you, remember this story. Remember that silence doesn't mean weakness. Sometimes, silence means someone is gathering their strength, waiting for the perfect moment to strike back. And when that moment comes, the impact can change everything. So tell me, have you ever faced a Karen or an unfair HOA? Did you fight back or did you let it slide? Share your story, because trust me, people out there need to hear it.